The study session of the Aurora City Council for Monday, November 6th is called to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Kaufman,
Here.
Councilmember Bergen, Councilmember Coombs, Mayor Pro Tem Gardner, Councilmember Drinsky,
Here.
Councilmember Lawson, Councilmember Marcano,
Present.
Councilmember Medina,
Here.
Councilmember Mario,
Present.
Councilmember Sandberg, Councilmember Zavodnik.
Here.
Thank you. The Mayor Pro Tem will not be with us tonight, and Councilmember Lawson is recovering from just having a COVID shot, and I know what that's like, and will not be with us tonight either. There's no mayor's update. Are there any issue updates? Seeing none, is there any objection to moving the consent calendar forward, item number 2A through 2T? Is there any objection? Seeing none, item number 3A, amendment to chapter 22 of the city code regarding residential rental certification program. Councilmember McConnell.
Right, thank you, Mayor. So this item has come about, as I'm sure you have all gotten a lot of complaints as well from residents about properties that are not being properly maintained. So I have actually toured a couple of these properties across the city, and the conditions that people are living with are horrific and, frankly, unacceptable. And I got to tell y'all, even where I live right now, my apartment complex is 4 years old. It's considered a luxury apartment complex. And we've had a repeat of maggot infestations here so bad that I've had to actually get code enforcement involved because our property management doesn't seem to be willing to fix the trash hauling issue here or properly dispose of the critters once they manifest. So this is something that, working with a lot of other impacted residents, we've come up with a ordinance that would hopefully change that would give code enforcement some more resources and also some more teeth to hold bad landlords accountable in our city. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand it off to staff if they want to add anything else before we get to our outside speakers on this.
Councilmember Marcano, we don't have anything to add at this point. Happy to be on for questions when we get to that point.
All right, fantastic. So I believe we have Alex Georgiadis and Alex Luna with UNE, who have a presentation to kind of walk y'all through what's in the proposal.
Hey everyone, we're having some actual technical difficulties right now with Alex's Webex. So give us a couple of minutes.
Okay. There's always something with Webex. I guess in that case, I guess what I'd like to propose is while you'll get the technical issues figured out, Mayor, could we just move on to the next item and then we can come back to this one?
Absolutely.
All right, great.
Item number 3B, Fiscal Committee report. Liz Rogers.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. For the record, my name is Liz Rogers, Intergovernmental Relations Manager from the city. So the FSIR committee met on November 3rd, and there are 2 updates for the Council. The committee took a support position on federal legislation, Senate Bill 2860, the Safer Banking Act. And the FSIR committee supported city staff in submitting comments during the regulatory process regarding Colorado Senate Bill 23-244, the Technology Accessibility Cleanup legislation. And you do have additional details on both of those items in the backup. So are there any questions on the positions taken by the committee?
Questions for Liz Rogers? Seeing none, thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
Item number, Councilmember Connor, just tell me when they're, are they up yet, or should we go to the next one?
Let me check real quick. Alex, if you're still there, did y'all get the issue figured out yet?
Yeah, one, it's not letting Alex log in. As she tries to log in, it keeps on sending her back to the main page.
Can staff help them, and we'll go to the next item?
Yep.
Okay. Item number 3C, 2023 Summer Community Investment Financing Round. Alicia Montoya, Community Development Manager, Housing and Community Services.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. Alicia Montoya, Housing and Community Development Manager. In Housing and Community Services, I am going to share my screen for presentation here, so give me just 1 second. So every year, can you see the screen? Can you see the presentation okay?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So
It's not on your, okay. Now it's just black. There we go.
okay, awesome. So every year we bring 2 rounds of community investment financing. We do the spring round and the summer round. The summer round is the latest one and it takes a little bit longer because it's later in the year. So coming back with the community investment financing round, the purpose of the community investment financing rounds is for us to provide specifically gap financing to developers that are interested in building affordable housing in the city of Aurora. It's our way to address or try and close the gap of the 7,500 units that were identified in our housing strategy back in December of 2020. And so we created the community investment financing process for that, for specifically to try and close that gap. There are different policies that we follow as we implement the process, the processes in relation to the housing strategy as a whole, which include fostering a balanced and sustainable affordable housing portfolio, preserving it, strengthening our local economy, and supporting our homeowners, expanding the portfolio that we already have. We try to really look at the different policies and make sure that the developers that we're supporting are supporting these policies and housing strategy goals as well. For this specific process, the components of the application obviously have to be aligned with the housing strategy, have to meet specific identified needs in the housing strategy. We look at the demographics that the development project is trying to target. We look at the diversity, we look at equity and inclusion. We look specifically at the area median income of the community that we're trying to serve. The effectiveness of the project and the overall available funding that we have. The supervisor of this program is Sarah Carroll, and she's actually going to give you a little bit more detail on the deadline, where we're at, and in regards to overall timeline and the specific recommendation or the specific recommended projects. Sarah?
Good evening. My name is Sarah Carroll. I'm the Housing Development Supervisor, and as Alicia alluded to, we did close the community investment financing rounds in August, and we had a review committee made up of city staff and our Citizens Advisory Committee that reviewed all of the applications received. We were able to issue pre-award letters, and we brought those recommendations to Horns on October the 12th. And now we're bringing those recommendations to the study session and wanted to issue final letters by the end of November. Next slide, please. So our review committee met on in late August, and it was made up of our planning staff, finance, community development, our Citizens Advisory Committee for Housing and Community Development. Next slide, please. We received a total of 4 agencies applied, a total of 7 applications, and we had approximately $4.5 million available, and they requested $26.9 million, and we recommend an award of $2.2 million at this time. Next slide, please. The scoring points awarded were from 44 to or 41 to 76 points for the scoring, and there were a total number of proposed units of 107. Next slide, thank you. We did recommend approval of the project worth more for $500,000 of CDBG and the Radiant Inn Motel of 1.7 in CDBG CV. But after the recommended award, we did receive notification from the facts that the purchase of that Radiant Inn Motel did fall through. And so at this time, we're not recommending any funding to them for that purchase. Next slide, please. So here are the ones that we did receive. Project Worthmore is actually a public service application. They requested $2 million in CDBG. Because this is a first time request from them, we are recommending just a $500,000 investment of CDBG funding so that we can establish some sort of relationship with them and see whether or not they can handle something near $2 million. So that was just a kind of a borderline type of recommendation. Next slide, please. Again, the Radiant Inn Motel, the Facts partnership was going to purchase this motel for one, and they requested 1.5 in home, 1.5 in CDBG, and 1.5 in ARPA. We only had home and CDBG funding available, and we recommended 1.7 in CDBG CV because it aligned better with CDBG CV. And then after the scoring, that actual purchase fell through. So at this time, we're not recommending any funding. Next slide, please. The BIPOC scattered sites, they requested 1.5 in CDBG. And at this time, due to some other issues that are going on, including we have some outstanding agreements with them that have not been finalized, we're recommending no funding for them at this time. Next slide, please. Halo Field of Dreams, they applied 4 times. They wanted to do 75 units. They requested 1 million in home, 3.4 in CDBG, 2 million in PAB funding, which we had none available for that, and 1 million in ARPA, which again, we had no funding in ARPA. And we recommended $0. This developer has no development actual experience. So for all 4 of the applications, we recommended no funding. So the next 3 slides are the same. So we can go through those. And well, this is horn still. But anyway, for City Council, we're asking if you recommend this moves forward to the regular session.
Is there any opposition to moving it forward?
Mayor, I have a question if I could.
Councilmember Zvonek.
And so on the first one, I don't remember what they requested. It was $1.5 million or 2 million, but the staff recommendation was $500,000. And I guess my question with that is, what will we get for $500,000? If they need 2 million for the full project, and we're giving them $500,000. Sometimes I worry about, giving, and I understand it's to see what they can do, but like, will it, I don't want to just throw it away, if that makes sense. I want to make sure that if we're spending $500,000, that there would be something that we would see in return for it, or will they be able to get the rest of their funding needed?
Absolutely. So we will be setting up an agreement with them. They are doing a rehabilitation on a public space. And so we'll be doing it under a public space, and we will be making sure that they meet a public service component to serving our Aurora residents. Will be watching demographics, the income served, and we'll also be making sure they're meeting our construction guidelines as well. We'll be going through the construction with them from start to finish.
And what would be left unfinished then, if with the other 1 point, whatever the number was?
We did meet with them to make sure that they could fill that gap. So if we run into a situation where they cannot fill that gap, we'll have further conversations with them at that time.
Okay.
Further questions? Opposition? Seeing none, then the recommendations of 3C will move forward. Councilmember O'Connell, your people up yet?
Yes, they are both on.
Very well. Please proceed.
All right, so go ahead and I'll introduce Alex Luna with UNE and Alex Georgiadis, and I'll let them both introduce themselves to all of you now.
Good evening, everyone. Obviously, as introduced as well, too, my name is Alex Luna. I'm the organizing director with United for a New Economy. I'm going to take some time to pass it to my colleague.
Hi, my name's Alex Georgiadis. I'm the policy analyst with United for a New Economy.
Alex, do you want to share the slide?
Can you all see it okay?
Yep.
Great.
And so, Alex, if you can go to the next slide. Just a little bit about our organization. UNE really believes that no matter what we look like or what's in our wallets, most of us work hard to provide for our family, to have a roof over our heads, and a place to be able to pursue our dreams. And so United for a New Economy, or UNE, envisions vibrant, strong communities with the power to build economic, political, and social systems where human lives are valued over human profit, and our common humanity succeeds over that try to divide us by race and class. So we build people power from racial and economic justice for all Coloradans to thrive. And we do that by organizing our communities across race, class, and gender to pass solutions that work for all of us. So we believe by coming together with our local government that we could build a power vehicle to create change here in Aurora on the issues that's impacting all of us, especially when it comes to housing and renters' rights. Alex? So just a little, oh, did I get back? My bad. So just to build up a little context, the way that we engage in our work as United for a New Economy is that we meet with directly impacted folks. In this case, it's been directly impacted renters regarding conditions and habitability issues that are happening within their complex. And so here we have knocked over more than 1,000 doors, had over 300 one-to-one conversations. And here are the properties that we've been engaging so far, and many more also single family homes as well too that are currently being rented as well too. Nome Street in Ward 1, also Kingston, Montview, that's also in Ward 1, Aurora Hills, which is in Ward 4, Highland Apartment, which is Ward 3, First Avenue, which is Ward 4, and Waterford of Southland, Ward 6. And so within these renters is not only hearing about these stories about how the impacts of their health condition, the retaliation that landlords are doing, just for the fact that renters are advocating for themselves and following the proper process to file complaints, are being threatened with eviction, are being threatened with retaliation, both in not only a rent increase to be priced out, but in also some cases as well too with physical violence. And so in this process to build this bridge between community to connect with local government to work towards these solutions, we help to empower folks to feel that they understand their rights and know that they have the right to be able to advocate their own rights. So we held 4 Know Your Rights training with Community Eviction Defense Project, CEDP. We've also held multiple research meetings with the city council and also with city staff as well too, which has been a blessing to meet with you all and to hear your perspectives. And then we're also currently working with individuals to work on filing lawsuits with CEDP alongside with Nome Street as well too. Alex? So part of this piece, when we look at code enforcement, right here, this is a property, I think we all know this very well around Nome Street. Well, this is just one picture of many incidents that are happening within this property. Within the 4th floor, I think Mayor Kaufman, you had the opportunity to walk the property where, you know, it seems like you're walking and you're about to tip over and fall off. Other places that we see within the property of, you know, having these issues, folks are having high extensive of mold within their apartment complex, no heating, and experiencing very severe retaliation that's coming from the landlord with threats of physical violence. Alex? But what we also see as well too in terms of retaliation, where this is coming from a single family home within Ward 4, where the tenant by the name of Whitney Goodman, who has been walking in this journey of fighting and advocating for herself, filed a maintenance request multiple times, filed a complaint against multiple flooding, massive cockroaches, leakage within the apartment. And what we've come to find out as well too, that she ended up calling code enforcement, Eugene, to come in, and Eugene was shocked and appalled and started working to create accountability. But the challenge that came from that, because of the protections that are minimal within statute, make it really challenging for her to actually have housing. So instead of actually addressing these issues that she's had since she moved in, what the landlord is choosing to do is not renew, is choosing to break the lease and telling her that no longer going to be renewing with her and that she has to find a place to live. Alex? And here are the health and impacts that are happening. And so within this photo as well too, which is happening with the same property, is that is not dirt that you're seeing that's on the floor. That is actually human waste that is coming from a pipe backup that's been happening within this property that Whitney has filed multiple complaints about plumbing issues. And so we're having folks that have high extensive of mold. We have folks that are not having adequate plumbing. And the level of health impacts that are happening that are creating that are impacting respiratory. They're also putting our folks in urgent care as well too. And so part of this is really just to paint the story of the work that we've been doing, and the fact that members are not seeing this as a place of powerlessness, but want to work with local government to be able to make that possible and hold this type of landlords accountable to making sure that they're also providing what they signed a lease to do, to provide a safe and healthy place to call home. And so with that, I'm going to pass it to Alex.
Thanks, Alex. So before we start talking about the proposed ordinance for a rental registry and certification program, I want to talk a little bit about some of the laws that Aurora currently has on the books and how Aurora currently approaches code enforcement and some of the challenges that have been coming up with how the systems are currently set up. So as a reminder, Chapter 22 of City Code outlines the Health and Housing Code that aims to protect public health and establish minimum standards for residential housing. So this has been on the book for decades, and these are the codes that code enforcement uses when doing its inspections. The City of Aurora is a home rule municipality, meaning that under Article 20, Section 6 of the Colorado Constitution, the city is authorized to pass ordinances and regulate local affairs, which includes ordinances for the administration and regulation of business activities within the city. Aurora currently has two types of programs to handle code enforcement. So there's the multifamily systematic inspection program and the complaint-based inspection program. Multifamily Systematic Inspection Program was established in 1993 and aims to inspect about 400 plus multifamily complexes with 33,000 plus units across the city. Units are typically inspected every 2 to 5 years, and if inspectors find violations, then the owner is given a set amount of time to correct them, and then the property is re-inspected to make sure it's up to code. For all other units that fall outside of the multifamily systematic inspection program, if a resident has a concern about a code violation, they can file a complaint with the city and an inspector will come out to inspect the issue. And similarly, if the inspector finds violations, the owner is given a set amount of time to correct it and the unit's re-inspected, and the city also has in place penalties for continued violations. With these current systems, we've identified a few key challenges that have been impacting residents' health and well-being. And the first one and most pressing one is really that landlords are not keeping their properties up to code and not fulfilling their obligation of keeping the properties in compliance with Aurora's current laws. While some residents are able to get this corrected with the complaint-based system, many residents fear retaliation and eviction and actually have been retaliated against for filing complaints, which is what Alex was describing with some of our members' experiences earlier. And so that ultimately ends up dissuading other residents in the building from filing complaints and speaking out, and puts residents in a dangerous situation where they could become unhoused if a landlord retaliates against them. An additional challenge with the complaint-based system is that many residents do not feel comfortable reaching out to the city due to barriers with their primary language that is spoken or their documentation status. So they don't file complaints with the city and ultimately end up living in unsafe and uninhabitable conditions. And lastly, we've heard from various stakeholders that the city simply does not have enough tools to adequately inspect all the properties that it needs to and enforce city code. Oftentimes, there's so many complaints that inspectors get pulled away from the systematic inspection schedule onto complaint cases because landlords aren't keeping their properties up to code and continuing to violate city laws and keep their properties out of compliance. So for all of these reasons, United for a New Economy is in support of a proactive inspection certification program because it would address many of the issues that I just outlined. This program would make inspections universal and would remove the fear of retaliation because residents would not need to file a complaint to have their unit inspected, but would still have the option to if they needed to. It would also increase enforcement for noncompliance with Aurora's current health and housing code. And lastly, the program would generate revenue from certification fees to keep the program self-funded over time. So now I'd like to share some examples of proactive rental inspection programs from around the country and how they've supported their communities. In Greensboro, North Carolina, their proactive inspection program helped bring nearly 9,000 rental properties up to code within the first few years that were previously out of code for many years. Similarly, Rochester, New York has a program that proactively inspects their units, and they found that the program helped identify neighborhoods with the highest risk for health hazards, and then so they were able to correct the violations before those health hazards continued to harm children and families. In Sacramento, the city found that in the first 5 years of its program, the number of housing and dangerous building cases was reduced by 22%, which many city officials have said is a direct result of their proactive rental inspection program. And one final example is Seattle, which has a proactive inspection and licensing program, and officials have shared that having this program and having a database of rental properties has allowed the city to share relevant updates to city laws quickly with property owners. Such as at the beginning of the pandemic, they had to revise health and safety mandates. They had a database of all of the rental properties in the city and could get that information out quickly to property owners. A proactive approach would benefit tenants living in Aurora, landlords who operate businesses here in Aurora, and the community at large. For tenants, regular inspections would protect tenants' health and safety by catching issues early on, such as mold, infestations, broken pipes, before they become more serious. Proactive inspections would also reduce housing inequities and ensure that every Aurora resident, regardless of where they come from, what they look like, how much money they make, is guaranteed a safe and healthy home that follows city code. For landlords, proactive inspections will prevent more serious maintenance issues by catching them early on, saving landlords both money and time in the long run. Proactive inspections will help landlords preserve their property's value by keeping the property in good condition, and they'll also help improve relationships between landlords and tenants by removing much of the need for filing complaints and remove the tension that many of our members have experienced with landlords around code enforcement issues. And lastly, for the community, by keeping property values high, this will preserve the property tax base that the city relies on to fund its city services. This program will also help build community trust by demonstrating to the community that residents' health and well-being and housing quality are important, and that when the city passes laws like housing codes, the city will then put in place programs to help adequately enforce the laws that are already on the books. I want to take a moment to zoom out and consider the overall rental housing market in Aurora and the state of housing quality in Aurora. We already know that rents have been increasing at unreasonable and unsustainable rates for residents in Aurora, but without the necessary improvements and repairs required to keep housing up to code. Data from the U.S. Census Bureau has shown that from 2017 to 2022, median rents for two-bedroom households in Aurora skyrocketed from $1,328 per month to $1,780 per month. So that's a 34% increase in the span of 5 years. The reality is that many landlords are choosing to raise rents with or without this program, but without fulfilling their obligation of keeping their properties in compliance with basic city housing codes. We know that rents are going to continue increasing, so the least we can do as a city is to ensure that all rental housing is up to code and residents have a safe and dignified place to live. And lastly, I want to spend some time discussing estimated costs and how it might impact renters. While some of the fees are still being finalized, we can estimate that if landlords choose to pass on 100% of cost to renters, this should come out to around $7.29 per month if the landlord owns a single dwelling. So that was calculated by adding the proposed license fee plus the estimated inspection cost, dividing it by 48 months since the certification would be valid for 4 years. So that is a very minimal fee ultimately, that even if landlords choose to pass 100% of it on, $7.29. And as a reminder, this program is ultimately intended to generate revenue through the fees. Thank you for your time.
Questions? Let me ask, do we have somebody from code enforcement here?
Mayor.
Councilmember O'Connell.
Thank you, sir. I think while we're waiting on a response, I do just want to add, because I failed to thank folks earlier, I just want to thank Michelle Gardner, Trevor Vaughn, Jessica Prosser, and Tracy Youngman, or Sandra Youngman, rather, for their work in getting this done. They've been really instrumental in shaping this ordinance, so I'm hoping that Sandra's with us today.
I am here, I'm sorry.
Okay, there. Okay, so we have, Sandra, we currently have a scheduled program for multifamily rental housing, correct? For inspection.
Yes, we do, correct.
So that part seems, and I think it was expressed in the presentation that the challenge is enforcement because the problems are pretty significant out there. And let me just say, I was just in Nome Street last week, meeting with an apartment owner. And I didn't have code enforcement with me, I had APD. And they had mentioned and we talked about this earlier today, that there was the apartment building, a fairly large, I think it was a 100-unit building on the corner of 16th and Nome that had been nuisanced. And that's I think that's a joint effort between your division, your department and APD, where there were just a number of requirements put on them, both from a safety standpoint to promote safety and to promote, to compliance with code enforcement. Can you speak to that building?
Well, code enforcement is still in, well, the code enforcement actually did a new systematic housing inspection started in July of this year. And we've gone through our 4 processes, the 4 inspections that we have, and they failed during the 4th one. So we've moved forward with the summons and the property owner will be in court. And I'm sorry, I don't have that date, but he's been issued a summons in court.
So it seems like on the multifamily side, I mean, obviously this, Councilmember McConnell, is it an annual inspection process under this system that you're putting forward?
That was, I believe, the initial proposal. Yes, is to basically speed up the rate at which we are inspecting these properties, because currently it's a 2 to 5 year turnaround, which we're really closer to 5 years, and that is not enough. So that's why we're trying to bring this forward to kind of speed up that clock. Yeah.
Well, so for some of the properties that are on our radar a little bit sooner than that, we do actually every year. So some of those properties in North Aurora, we're doing annually, as well as the hotels and motels along East Colfax, we're doing those annually. So it just depends on the condition of the property, et cetera, which if they failed profusely through the inspections, then we would do them more often.
But what is not covered in terms of routine inspections would be multifamily properties that are individually owned condominiums.
Well, so if it's a property, excuse me, so if it's owned by someone, that is their responsibility to take care of their property. If it's a condo that's rented, then we would do, and we receive a complaint, we would respond to that complaint. So we have the 2 processes that she spoke of, which was the multifamily systematic housing, which we do every 2 to 5 years, but more often as needed. And then complaint based, which could be a single family resident if it's a rental. We also get complaints from homeowners that own those condos that call us for assistance. But since they own the property, they are ultimately responsible for that.
Okay. But if it's a rental, if they're renting their condo out, then that would be treated the same as a single family property, correct? It would be complaint driven. There wouldn't be a periodic inspection process.
Correct.
So I think one of the things that were mentioned is that there's an enforcement problem. Could you speak to that? I mean, I think that the challenge is pretty significant out there. Can you speak to the enforcement problem that was mentioned in the presentation?
Well, so we have, a number of units, a number of complexes throughout the city of Aurora that we're trying to get inspected. And some of those complexes are very large, could be 500 and 600 units. So that takes the full staff of my 19 staff members right now that inspect a large complex that would take possibly up to 2 days because we're inspecting every unit for the minimum life safety. So we have teams of 2 that go into each unit that inspect for the minimum life safety. So we're looking for example, infestations. We're looking for smoke detectors, windows and screens and tripping hazards and plumbing issues, those kinds of things. And so when we go in, we try to work fairly quickly to get in, and we have a pattern that we use when we go into the units to do the inspections. And we go in and out and inspect every unit within that complex. Obviously, we have some staffing issues. If we have more staff, that would certainly be beneficial to be able to get to more units more often. But some of the complexes are in really good shape, and there are others that are lacking.
I can't remember who was with earlier this year. Myself and Councilmember Lawson visited an apartment building that was mentioned in the presentation that had a lot of complaints. I can't recall where it was.
It was Alex Hernandez from Nome Street, apartment 418.
What's the
It
address?
was the 1568 Nome Street, council member.
It was
Or
Okay,
mayor.
1568 Nome Street.
Mhm.
Okay, I seem to spend a lot of time on Nome Street. A whole lot. Okay, but can you, Sandra, can you speak to what happened in that property? Because I know that when I went there, there were some tenants that expressed to me concern about retaliation. And where else would they go? It was a relatively low rent apartment building. And so they were concerned about where they could go to get the same rent. If in fact the landlord retaliated, if the landlord would retaliate against them. Can you speak to that? What is the status of that building too right now?
So that building, like I said earlier, we've completed our 4-3 inspection for their annual multifamily systematic housing inspection, and they failed to come into compliance with their units that had continuing violations, and the property owner has been issued a summons to court. So at that 4-3 inspection, we took photographs and prepared our summons. I'm sorry, I don't know the date, but I know the last inspection, I believe, was on November 2nd. So we're moving forward with the summons on that. I wasn't there the evening you all were out there. I do know some of the tenants. I had spoke to a couple of tenants at one of Councilmember Murillo's meetings, and there had been some issues. So I don't know as far as what happened that evening, and I don't know anything more about as far as if they were saying those kinds of things. They didn't have a place to go, so I don't know that I can answer that question.
So I think on the multifamily part, I think we're covered. That's just my opinion, but I think that, but I do have a concern, and I want you to address the single family side, which does not have a scheduled inspection process.
That's correct.
Can you, but it is complaint driven. But can you address what the benefits would be in having a scheduled process on that?
Well, first of all, we find out how many units within the city of Aurora, how many complex units are actually being rented out. So we'd be able to know who the owners are, be able to deal with them a lot quicker than if we don't have them. Sometimes we try to track them down. Sometimes they're out of state, so we have those kinds of issues. So it'd be important to have that owner information for code enforcement to be able to make contact and get the issues corrected sooner. And inspections, I think we're talking about a certificate for this ordinance that we're talking about versus an inspection. So if we don't know how many rental units we have in Aurora, so it would help us take a look at those properties before somebody entered them under this ordinance. So, Trevor, do you want to pipe in?
Yeah.
Well, just a couple technical aspects on it. The ordinance has a 4-year certificate proposed in it. So it would have an initial inspection that would be good for 4 years and then a reinspection on that. And the inspection in this ordinance, we would not be proposed to be performed by city staff. It would be by contractors hired by the city, similar to a little bit similar to how Denver does it, but different in that the contractors would be responsible to the city. So wouldn't necessarily end up in the code enforcement cycle.
So walk me through the process if let's just say we're applying this to single family homes and to condominiums, townhomes that are rental properties. And I'm an owner, what process do I go through, Trevor?
So under this, you would be required to get a certificate. We have a 2-year implementation program proposed in it. First by January 2025 would be multifamily. January 2026 be single family. The requirement would be to get apply for a certification by that date and have a passing inspection. So they would need to schedule an inspection with inspectors hired by the city that would go out, inspect that property, and certify that it's in compliance with the minimum standards, and then be issued that certification. Without that certification, they would be not able to operate lawfully as far as renting out that property.
Okay. Are there other questions or comments?
Mayor Jurenski.
Councilmember Jurenski.
Yeah, thank you. I just kind of have an issue with the fact that it feels like there wasn't much stakeholder input before bringing this ordinance forward. I know I've heard from Smedra and I've heard from a couple other groups and organizations that are just a little upset that there was no community involvement, no community engagement or input in this. And obviously, so therefore, obviously nothing taken into consideration. I think for me, I would like for that to happen. This council has said many times, and we have stalled things and put things off until there is some sort of community input. And so I would ask for that same respect on this ordinance, that this not even continue to go forward tonight, and that you reach out to community stakeholders and get their input.
Mayor?
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to remind my colleagues, this was actually stake held with directly impacted community members. UNE, which is an organization that basically helps organize folks who are dealing with these kinds of issues in the city. And of course, folks who, a lot of city staff who are engaged already with dealing with slumlords and who understand the licensing process and, some effective ways that we can actually help empower our residents, our constituents. To be able to ensure that they have, high quality housing and then not being mistreated or retaliated against. So I feel like, this was stake held from the jump.
Mayor Jurenski.
Councilmember Jurenski.
Well, that's just not how our stakeholders are feeling, and you don't get to decide their feelings for them, one. Also, two, I have had incidents where I have had people call me and tell me that they've had issues with their apartments or whatever rental property they're living in. One was so bad. There was so much mold that the apartment was physically growing mushrooms in it. That's how bad it was. I turned it over to city staff. I submitted a council request, and that resident called me within 48 hours thanking me that the city did a great job and that it was being completely taken care of almost immediately. So I think what's happening now is working.
Mayor?
Councilmember Combs.
Yeah, so I think there's another component that hasn't been mentioned around the single family that would be addressed to some extent by this ordinance. And that is that oftentimes your invitation homes and other entities that own single family housing will build into their lease a provision that if there is a code enforcement violation that is not discovered by the tenant within the first week of living in the home and reported to the landlord within the first week of living within the home, then they will be charged the fine that the landlord gets for that problem. I actually had a lease that had that within it, even though I moved into a house with no landscaping whatsoever, except for some very large trees that were creating more problems than good in the yard. So I would have been cited for their failure from the jump to provide appropriate landscaping that would meet city code. And similarly, there were a number of other issues, no cooling, which I didn't discover when I moved in when cooling wasn't needed. It wasn't until I tried to turn the cooling on that I discovered that issue. But if I had reported that, I would have been charged for the costs of that issue. So I think that that's something that A, is problematic that it's even permitted within leases, but because it is, having the properties actually have to be in compliance before a tenant moves in would make that less impactful on the tenant and permit them to report violations as they come up. And then secondly, it's very clear that what we have is not working. You know, not any disrespect to our staff, who I know do try to follow up as quickly and as well as they can. But in the case of this one property that Sandra was talking about, they've now done their 4th inspection and are still not in compliance. Like, that is not working. And that's despite having the penalties that we already have in place. And I believe this property has been told that they're going to have some pretty hefty fines, and they're still not coming into compliance. And that's not a standalone issue. There are many, many people in our city who, despite reports to code enforcement and code enforcement issuing citations, are still living in completely uninhabitable conditions. So that's not working.
Well, I don't know if you say the current system isn't entirely working because we don't know. The court hasn't decided that particular case yet, have they, Sandra?
No, they have not.
They have not, so we don't know. We don't know that, and I don't think that that's going to change under the current system. That in some clients, they're going to go through different levels in terms of the reinspection process until they wind up in court. That doesn't change. I tell you where I am right now. I'm a little uncomfortable with the multifamily side, but I think that we may have a gap that could be addressed by this on the single family side. Not prepared to move it forward right now. I mean, personally, I don't know what the rest of the council is going to do. But that's where I am. Further discussion?
Yeah, Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you. I do want to just say that some of the images that were in the presentation, those were incredibly tame. If y'all went to the Nome property, God, I wish y'all could smell the smell of some of these units and seen the conditions that people were living in, seen the notices of retaliation that were taped on their doors where they're just, the landlord is randomly asking for more money because they had the nerve to complain that there's a, ongoing issue with their unit. That the trash receptacles were overflowing and bringing in rats and other vermin onto the property. And that's just that one property. As I mentioned, I live in a, about 4.5-year-old apartment complex right now. I'm the only tenant that's ever lived in my unit. We keep it pretty damn clean. And my neighbors, I think, do a pretty good job as well. But we ended up with an infestation of maggots in the common area. And then those things wriggled into our apartment complexes. And if y'all have ever seen maggots coming out of your walls, I'm sorry, because it's a horrific thing to behold. And then what do maggots turn into? Flies. So then we ended up dealing with a fly infestation for a week after each time this has happened. And the trash room right now, if y'all want to come over, I'll open it for you. It is overflowing in there. So it's clear that our fee schedule is permissive. That's one of the things that we haven't really talked about with this is that currently being a slumlord is just the cost of doing business in this city. And with this ordinance, we'd actually empower Trevor and his team to set up a fee schedule that would put an end to that behavior. Because the court process, yes, the slumlord for Nome Street, he's going to face his day in court, but that takes a long time. And right now, there's nothing that actually protects the tenants that are dealing with these awful conditions. That is what we need to get a hang on here, because the ultimate goal should be to ensure that all of our residents have housing that is safe, that is clean, and that is dignified for them. And our current staffing levels and our revenue and our code just don't allow for that. So this ordinance would give Sandra's team more resources so that she could staff up and ensure that we can keep up with the really rapid growth that we're experiencing with all of our housing stock. But most importantly, would ensure that these property owners are actually providing housing as opposed to exploiting people who might not have any other options. So that's what we need to really understand with this, y'all. Not doing anything right now is basically saying we're okay with the slumlords. We're okay with the crime and with the poor health conditions and all of the other awful things that those kinds of properties bring to our city. All of our residents deserve better. So I would expect this council to do the job and to protect our residents, especially when they don't have any protections right now.
Trevor, if I could ask you a question. This, I mean, in terms of the reinspection process and the court process, this really doesn't change that, does it not?
No, it wouldn't change that.
Oh,
So
yeah.
for a multifamily, we go through our processes and then go to court.
Yeah.
This ordinance is a certificate for the property owners to have an inspection before they rent out.
This does allow for suspension of that certificate during the, during the time period that it's valid. If there are issues there, there are some actions, potentially some civil actions that are built into this proposed ordinance to have another approach at trying to gain compliance.
Okay. Could you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so the certificate that they have, once they have it, if there are issues discovered during the time period, as I said, it was valid for 4 years. If there are issues discovered during that time period, and that's why code enforcement is proposed as part of the cost, is that code enforcement could then respond to those issues, and there is a process to go through a potential suspension of that certification. If that certification is suspended, then they could not lease that property lawfully. It doesn't do anything as far as kicking out tenants that are within the property. It doesn't interfere with those tenant rights that are already there, but they couldn't advertise that property for lease or engage lawfully in that until the issues were resolved. As part of the resolving those issues, there's also the possibility of imposing civil fines through rule structure to try to encourage that property to get into compliance. And that may actually be a little bit faster process than the criminal process.
So, but I think that all that exists right now, is it not?
There is not a civil process right now. This is a criminal process that has to work its way through the court system. Is that right, Sandra? I'm not missing anything.
Are you talking for the housing inspections? Yes.
Yep. Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Further discussion?
Mayor,
Councilmember Mario.
thank you. I just want to voice my support for this proposal. I've toured, I've canvassed for years different multifamily units across Ward 1 and even across Aurora. I've toured the Gnome building as well. And I mean, it gets pretty egregious, right? There's a lot that if you're afraid of retaliation, that you'll put up with, because frankly, there's not a lot of other options. You know, we're doing a lot in terms of trying to create more housing options, but we know that it's tight. And so it's kind of like stuck between a rock and a hard place. And, you know, it just is crazy to hear that that people are living in these conditions and that people don't have recourse because of the aforementioned reasons, right? There's no recourse for people to feel safe and be healthy. You know, there was a woman I spoke to who her newborn daughter had respiratory issues, and that was the direct result of the black mold in her unit. I think we have to do something about the I'll say inadequate, and that's putting it nicely, living conditions that some people have to live through. And just because we are shielded from that doesn't mean that that's not real problems. It's, and I was going to say, in terms of the stakeholdering, I've seen the up zone for an entire district, my district, pass with 3 public meetings where there were 30 people each, like triple counted from each meeting because I went to them. So if 1,000 door knocks and 300 individual one-on-one conversations isn't robust public stakeholding, I don't know what is. So I really, I would say, in fact, I was impressed with the level of constituents that were contacted, especially constituents that are directly experiencing the issues. Oh, sorry, it looks like there's a bit of a lag on my end, but wanting to just uplift that, I think that that is deep stakeholding within the community, especially with folks who are being harmed by the lack of accountability that we have baked into the system. I would also say, in terms of being able to cover the 3rd largest city, almost 400,000 people. Sandra, how many code officers do you have?
Right now, I have 19 code officer positions, and I'm down 2, so I have 17, and I have 3 that are in training in the middle of their training, their 8 to 10 week training process.
That's great. I mean, 17 to cover 400,000, a city of 400,000. I think from what I hear when I work with code, they're doing their best. I would love to continue to resource that this arm of our city work, because it's not enough. If you have to go through the volume of people, Sandra mentioned a couple hundred units, 2 days, you have to, you sacrifice something in having to meet volume, just the sheer volume. And that's not a dig on our staff. I think they are working within the constraints and the limitations that they have. So I think this is really needed. If you have not had the opportunity to experience what it's like living in a unit that continually is not up to code, and have to live with that in and day out, day out, until it gets to a point where there's legal action. And on top of that, that takes years for that to go through. So not only did it take years for it to get to the point where folks could put together a lawsuit, it takes years for that lawsuit to be resolved. And in the interim, folks are vulnerable, breathing in black mold, living in with sewage ridden floors, and we're not at least trying to be proactive about it. I think everything about this ordinance seems reasonable and logical in terms of us being proactive in addressing health and safety standards for our residents. And I guess my last question on the nuisancing of a property, can somebody walk me through what that process looks like?
Well, typically PD will take the lead on the nuisance of a property, but they take a gathering of activity, criminal activity, calls for service. And then they also work with other departments or divisions. So they would obtain information from code enforcement or fire inspectors, that kind of thing. And then they would create, it's a civil issue, a notice to the property owner, typically, of what happens with the discussion of nuisancing their property and what they're looking for to have done. I think that's probably putting it very simply.
Gotcha. My understanding is that it takes a long time as well. And as we just heard, it takes multiple departments. So we're not only addressing an issue that is long-standing, is persistent, we're also using staff time and city dollars to have to go in and do something about a really poorly maintained property, when I feel like this ordinance is doing the opposite. We're being more resourceful and trying to be proactive instead of waiting for something to get to the point where now we have to involve 4 or 5 different departments use their staff time that could be better spent elsewhere. So again, I'm in support of this. I think is for many reasons a very logical, reasonable, proactive way that we can support residents, making sure that there's a minimum health and safety standard and resourcing our staff to be able to do that.
Further questions or comments? Seeing none, those who are in support of moving 3A forward, please, if you could please identify yourself.
Marcano?
Councilmember Marcano.
Coombs.
Coombs.
Murillo.
You. I'm sorry. Medina. Can you hear me? Yes. Is there anyone else? Councilmember McConnell, I think there is some merit here. I don't know, but I think it's going to require some more discussion than we can have here at this meeting. I would certainly be willing to work with you on this to see if, as well as staff, to see if we can prioritize this to what's important. Very well. So it will not move forward, but again, Councilmember McConnell has the ability to move it forward on its own, should he choose to do so. Item number 3D, okay, let's see. Item number 3D, intergovernmental agreement, IGA, between the City of Aurora Youth Violence Prevention Program and Aurora Public Schools for data sharing. Joseph D. Herrera, Youth Violence Prevention Program Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Joseph D. Herrera, Manager of the Youth Violence Prevention Program. Quick kind of overview. This agreement really is just in place with the Youth Violence Prevention Program and Aurora Public Schools for data sharing for students who are facing, potentially truant, some behavioral concerns, discipline fighting, bullying, those types of things. So we can, as the Youth Violence Prevention Program, take those students that are facing maybe some additional risk factors that could be propelling them into some behaviors that we're not wanting to see. We could use our case management services to help provide resources for those students and their families. We just wanted to have this agreement in place. We're in the process of getting an agreement in place, the same agreement actually with Cherry Creek School District as well, just so we have the ease of data sharing and can hopefully get resources and get engaged with these students and their families before we get to the point of potentially having some events or more severe activities that the students would be participating in. And that is really all that I have this evening, but I'm happy, of course, to answer questions or provide any clarification on any section that might be needed.
Questions of staff?
Mayor.
Councilmember Murillo.
Thank you. And thank you, Joseph. Does this data sharing go the other way? So we're receiving information from APS for services. Are we sharing data back with them?
So the data that we would be sharing back with them would be any of the students that we would be working with, essentially. So we're able to provide updates for them through case management services, those types of data sharing, I guess, if that answers your question.
Yeah, I guess I just want to make sure that the data is being shared in a helpful manner and not in a way that perpetuates, the school to prison pipeline, right? That
Sure.
So I just want to be clear that we're sharing data based on just who's receiving services. Okay.
Yep. Yeah. So great question. Thank you. So it would strictly be based on who is receiving the services and, the services that are provided. Really, it's to kind of create that safeguard, not to be a punitive thing, but just so we're able to provide those services and get connected sooner with these students and their families' lives. It's really nothing other than that, and really kind of more high-level demographic information that we're able to use is what we're going to be getting from APS, and then what we'd be sharing back with them, of course, is services that were provided, and then any follow-up that would be needed, and then, of course, any follow-up that we would have, 3, 6, 9 months down the road.
Great, thank you.
Further questions or comments? Seeing none, is there any objection to moving item number 3D forward? Seeing none, item number 3D will move forward. Item number 3C, 2023 Fall Supplemental Ordinance.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jackie Amon, Budget Program Manager in the Budget Office. And departments have two opportunities each year to bring forward supplemental budget requests, once in the spring and once in the fall. To avoid surprises, it's our goal that most supplemental items be reviewed by council either as part of the current budget year projection or part of the current year projection included in the annual budget or reviewed at a council committee meeting or city council meeting. Council review details are included in the narrative for each supplemental request. This fall process includes a relatively small number of requests, primarily in the Capital Projects Fund. All items with an impact to the fund balance were projected, which means they're in our financial plan, and that's a good thing. The few items that were not projected are technical to appropriate new grant awards or designated revenue with no impact to any fund balance. So rather than talk about each individual request, we have department representatives here to address any specific questions you may have.
Thank you. Questions to staff? Seeing none, is there any objection to moving item number 3E forward? Seeing none, item number 3E will move forward. Item number 3F, protection and rights for victims of domestic violence. Presiding Judge Sean Day.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. What you have before you is an ordinance that is required by House Bill 23-1222, bringing our code into compliance with the statute. It requires us to adopt formally the definition of domestic violence. It also formally requires the municipal court in the city to adopt the Victims' Rights Act, all the requirements of notification, sentencing requirements, and that's really it. It brings our code up to compliance with all of the state statutes for domestic violence. I know Julie Heckman's online too. We're both here to answer any questions that you may have.
Questions of staff? Seeing none, thank you, Chief Judge Day. Is there any objection to moving item number 3F forward? Seeing none, item number 3F will move forward. Thank you. Julie, thank you, Judge. 3G, changing Article 6 of Chapter 2 of the City Code pertaining to contracts and purchasing and other related matters. Brian Fillinger, Manager of Purchasing Services and Finance.
Mayor, this is Roberto Venegas. I'll introduce this item for Bryn to provide the details. Just by way of background, this item was brought to the M&F committee on October 24th and was moved forward to a study session without objection. By way of background and working with external vendors, we often hear that contracting with local governments can be challenging, with businesses citing prolonged selection processes and extensive documentation to secure bids. To address some of those issues, the proposed changes seeks to create a more predictable and efficient contracting and procurement process that expedites approval, reduces documentation requirements, and generally assists the business community in contracting with the city of Aurora. Within the city, it will assist the purchasing department as they support departments citywide with a more efficient, streamlined procurement process. So with that, I will turn it over to Bryn Fillinger, our Manager of Purchasing, to provide an overview of the proposed changes.
Okay, thank you, Roberto. And I have Kristen Chiwiwi with me today to help share the presentation. So again, it's a proposed ordinance to change and update Article 6 of Chapter 2. Next slide, please. Are you okay, Kristen? Kristen, are you able to change to the next slide? Apparently not. So
So let me see what I can do here. I apologize.
Does someone else have access to the presentation? Oh, the slide changed.
Did it change? Okay. Let me go back to my screen. Okay, the next, okay, the updates, okay, to purchasing code are being presented in order to streamline the purchasing process and to allow for more timely and efficient delivery of goods, services, and construction. These updates were, in addition to what Roberto mentioned, presented to management staff and the M&F committee, they were also presented to the procurement advisory committee. Next screen. Okay, so first of all, to start, 2-669, adequate funding required. Currently, this is the code that establishes the requirement to submit an authorized written request signed by the funding department to purchasing, what we call purchase requisitions. The funding request budget has already been appropriated by council in the current year's budget. The code currently requires the deputy city manager to authorize requests over $25,000. What we're proposing is to allow for the appropriate department director or designee to authorize the request. Okay, 2-670, formal competitive bidding and request for proposals. This section establishes the threshold of $25,000 or more for conducting formal written bids or negotiated requests for proposals. This threshold was established in 2001, and in today's dollars, that 25,000 translates to 44,000. So our proposal is to raise the threshold for a formal process to $50,000 or more. Also in 2-670, it establishes a threshold for requiring bid bonds in the amount of 5% of the bid for construction projects of $25,000 or more. The bid bond protects the city in the event the successful bidder fails to enter into a contract with the city and the city incurs additional administrative costs in awarding to a second contractor or rebidding the project. And what the proposal here is to raise that threshold to $50,000 or more to align with the proposed change to the threshold for formal written bids. 2-671 awards the lowest responsive bidder or most advantageous proposal. Among other things, this section authorizes job order contracting for engineering services, master engineering services, and other job order contracts. Our proposal is that we specifically authorize job order construction contracting. This would simplify and expedite the construction procurement process so work can begin faster. 2-672, authority to make awards. This section establishes council reporting requirements, either through purchasing's weekly report to council or approval at a formal council meeting. Currently, awards of $50,000 to just under $2 million require formal council approval when less than 3 bids or proposals are received in a competitive process, or also non-competitive awards. And then it also, formal council approval is also required for all awards of $2 million or more. Our proposal is to allow for all awards of $50,000 or more to be reported on purchasing's weekly report to council, subject to call up, rather than requiring approval at a formal council meeting. And this bar chart shows a comparison of estimated awards since 2020 that have gone to formal council for approval. So the vast majority of awards do not go to formal council for approval. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. And then in order to provide transparency to the public, the weekly report is posted on the purchasing page of the city's website, the auroragov.org. And we've already made steps to have this report be more visible to residences or to actually anyone who wants to go and to see what the city's doing. So we've already made it more visible and may take steps to make that more visible. Okay, and informal bidding currently allows the purchasing manager to establish written and published procedures for solicitations to award purchases and contracts in an amount less than $25,000. The proposal is to increase this threshold to less than $50,000. And we would like departments to be responsible for informal bidding in accordance with written guidance from purchasing. Awards less than $25,000 will not require an informal process. However, departments will still be required to consider price reasonableness. 2-676 change orders. This establishes council reporting requirements for change orders either through purchasing's weekly report to council or approval at a formal council meeting. Currently, formal council approval is required for change orders of 100,000 or more, and that's cumulative, and for change orders for construction contracts that exceed contingency. Our proposal is to allow all change orders over $50,000 to be reported on the weekly report, subject to call-up, and no reporting of change orders for construction contracts within approved contingency. 2-678 surplus stock allows for donations of surplus stock if the items are not claimed by any department in the city. Items may be donated to charitable or nonprofit organizations. An item with an estimated value of $500 or more requires the city manager to notify city council of the intent to donate 10 days prior to the transfer. We are proposing that this threshold be increased for notifying council the donation from $500 to $5,000 to align with the city's capitalization program. Mandatory requirements in city contracts requires performance and payment bonds for construction contracts of $25,000 or more. We are proposing to increase the threshold for the performance and payment bonds to $50,000 to align with the proposed increase in thresholds. And with that, are there any questions?
Questions of staff?
Mayor.
Councilor Combs.
Yeah, so this is all fairly straightforward. The one section that I was wondering about is there's the change from lowest bid to best value, but there's not really much discussion of metrics. How are the best value metrics going to be established?
Then we have best value in the code, and we take into consideration, and it can vary by RFP, whatever works best, but we take into consideration experience, qualifications, the proposed staffing, the proposed methodology. It would be those basics. And it could vary by RFP, but those matrix are included in the RFP, so all the firms know how they're going to be evaluated.
Further discussion? Further questions? Seeing none, is there any objection to moving item 3G forward? Seeing no objection, item number 3G will move forward. Item number 5A,
Thank you.
order and procedure. Rule change requiring all items to have a nexus to Aurora. I'm putting this forward because I think that we have very significant problems in our city that we, as elected officials, were elected to solve. Whether it's reducing crime or the challenges of homelessness or how to deal with housing affordability. That has to be our focus, and not issues for which we have no jurisdiction over. So it merely states that if you bring your resolution forward, that it has to have a direct nexus to the city. Discussion?
Mayor.
Councilmember Coombs.
I mean, I have a concern that this will result in more issues as far as silencing things that could be brought forward by a council member. Every council member has the purview to bring forward things that they think are of value. And so leaving it up to either the chair or appealing a ruling of the chair about whether or not something has a nexus, I think really impinges on that prerogative of council members to bring something forward. So, right, I think that it's just too much of a question of opinion of whether something has a nexus to the city. Making a statement to our community about something that we value still is a nexus to the city, or at least can be argued as such. And so I just think this, I don't think it really resolves the issue that you want to resolve. And I think it does open us up to a lot of problems in terms of our procedures.
Further questions, or I'm sorry, further comments?
Mayor.
Councilmember Zavonic.
Yeah, I would just, I agree with Councilmember Coombs on the, I understand what you're trying to get at, and I agree with the concept. The thing I worry about is that we do a lot of resolutions that we all agree on, and so then it becomes, what do we disagree on, and who gets to decide that? And so I'm not sure that there's a solution to what you're trying to prevent, even though I understand what it is. I just don't know that this is the right way to do it.
Well, there's a lot of issues out there that are very controversial that don't have to do directly with the city of Aurora, with the residents that we were elected to serve. And so we can either spend our time on those issues, or we can spend our time on the issues that matter to the people, because that we have control over as decision makers to make a difference.
Yep.
That's the objective. Further comments?
Mayor.
Councilmember O'Connell.
Thank you, sir. I just want to say that I agree with both council members Coombs and Zavonic on this, and I think that the best thing we can do to avoid a situation that we might not want to experience again is to just exercise good judgment. So.
Further discussion? Is there objection to moving item number 5A forward?
I object.
I object.
I object. Coombs.
I object as well, Medina.
Zirinsky.
Further objection?
Did you get Murillo, Mayor?
Yes. Very well. Item number 5A will not move forward. Item number 5B, grant request from the road. Okay. Item number 5B, grant request from the Rotary Club of Aurora will be moved to the next study session. The Mayor Pro Tem is not with us tonight. With that, I see no further issues before the Aurora City Council, and the study session is adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Night, all.
Tomorrow.